Welcome to a deep dive
Okay.
into this really pivotal period in early Islam,
Right.
the years between 614 and 620 AD.
Okay.
We're going to be uncovering some surprising twists and turns as we explore how this fledgling faith faced challenges, gained momentum, and ultimately set the stage for its dramatic expansion.
Okay.
Our guides for this journey are excerpts from William Muir's The Life of Mahomet,
Okay.
which provides rich historical context,
Wow.
and The Veil, a book focusing on the lives of women in early Islam.
That's a fascinating period.
Yeah.
Because you can really see the push and pull between the old ways of Mecca and this new faith that was challenging the established order.
Right, it's like watching a social and religious earthquake unfold in real time.
Exactly.
And speaking of upheavals, let's start with what our sources call the Abyssinian roller coaster.
Okay.
Apparently, a group of early Muslims facing persecution in Mecca sought refuge in Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia. They were essentially fleeing for their lives, hoping to find a place where they could practice their faith freely.
And for a while, they did find that safe haven.
Okay.
But then they heard rumors that back in Mecca,
Yeah.
there had been a mass conversion to Islam.
Hmm.
Imagine their excitement, thinking that the tide had turned and it was finally safe to return home.
Oh, that must have felt like a beacon of hope,
Right.
a sign that their struggles were finally over.
Except it turned out to be a false alarm.
Oh, no.
They returned to Mecca only to find that things were pretty much the same,
Wow.
if not worse.
Talk about a crushing disappointment.
Yeah.
What happened?
Well, Muir suggests that the rumor might have stemmed from a very controversial incident,
Okay.
something early Islamic historians refer to as the Satanic versus affair. Apparently, Mahomet, under immense pressure from the Quraysh tribe, who vehemently opposed his teachings, might have briefly considered incorporating pagan goddesses
Oh, wow.
into his message as a way to appease them.
Wait, he considered mixing paganism with his monotheistic message?
Yeah.
That seems like a pretty radical move, even in a moment of crisis.
It's definitely one of the most debated episodes in early Islamic history.
Yeah.
Some scholars believe it was a genuine lapse in judgment,
Okay.
a moment of weakness under duress.
Okay.
Others see it as a calculated,
Yeah.
albeit temporary compromise designed to ease tensions and buy time.
Uh-huh.
And of course, some dismiss it as a later fabrication, a story intended to discredit Muhammad.
So it's a bit of a historical mystery then.
It is.
But regardless of whether it actually happened or not,
Yeah.
this incident, or even the rumor of it, had a real impact on those early converts who returned from Abyssinia.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
It highlights just how vulnerable they were, how desperately they longed for acceptance,
Yeah.
and how easily their hopes could be dashed.
Right.
It also shows how precarious Muhammad's position was at this point.
Yeah.
He was walking a tightrope, trying to spread his message, while also navigating the complex political and social realities of Mecca.
And let's not forget the power dynamics at play. He was challenging the religious and economic elite of Mecca.
Yeah.
The very people who benefited from the status quo. It's no wonder they pushed back so hard.
It's a classic story of power and resistance.
Yeah.
And within this power struggle, family ties become incredibly important.
Okay.
While many turned against Muhammad, he did have a staunch defender in his uncle Abu Talib.
Right. Abu Talib, the head of their clan.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that he never actually converted to Islam.
Exactly. And yet he fiercely protected his nephew, even when pressured by the Quraysh to disown him.
Wow.
Muir recounts a dramatic confrontation where the Quraysh basically told Abu Talib, chooses silence him or fight with him.
What a stark choice.
It was.
So how did Abu Talib respond to that ultimatum?
He was deeply moved by Muhammad's unwavering commitment to his mission and declared that he would protect him until death.
Wow.
This loyalty, even from someone who didn't share Muhammad's beliefs, is crucial to understanding the social dynamics of the time.
It really underscores the importance of kinship and tribal bonds in 7th century Arabia.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about individual belief.
Right.
It was about clan loyalty, honor, and standing up for your own even when they challenged the norms.
That's a really important insight. It wasn't just about converting individuals.
Yeah.
It was about changing the entire social fabric of Mecca, which is a far more daunting task.
So we've got a small but resilient group of believers facing persecution, a leader who is navigating complex political pressures,
Right.
and a powerful clan system that shapes alliances and loyalties.
Yeah.
It's a powder keg waiting to explode.
And explode it does.
Oh.
This precarious balance starts to shift with two incredibly impactful conversions.
Okay.
Those of Hamza and Omar.
These weren't just any conversions, were they?
No, they weren't.
These two figures brought something significant to the table, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Hamza was Muhammad's uncle,
Okay.
a respected warrior known for his strength and bravery.
Yeah.
Imagine the impact when he publicly declared his allegiance to Islam after witnessing Muhammad being verbally abused by Abu Jahl, one of his most vocal opponents.
It's like a scene straight out of a movie.
It is.
This fierce warrior, outraged by the injustice he sees, steps in to defend his nephew, and in doing so throws his weight behind this new faith. Talk about a power move.
It was a huge turning point. And then you have Omar, who was initially a fierce persecutor of Muslims.
Oh, wow.
His conversion is equally dramatic. He went to confront his own sister and brother-in-law, who were secretly practicing Islam.
Okay.
But instead of punishing them, he was deeply moved by the beauty and power of the Quranic verses they were reciting.
So he went from being a sworn enemy to a devoted believer, almost overnight.
It was a radical transformation, and a very public one.
Yeah.
Remember, both Hamza and Omar were prominent figures in Meccan society.
Right.
Their conversions weren't just personal choices. They were public endorsements that legitimized Islam in the eyes of many.
It's like suddenly this fringe movement gained the support of two major influencers, I bet, that sent shockwaves through Mecca.
It absolutely did.
Yeah.
It gave the Muslim community a sense of legitimacy and emboldened others to come out into the open and practice their faith more openly. Islam was no longer a whispered secret.
Right.
It was a force to be reckoned with.
Yeah.
But this growing momentum also provoked a backlash. The Quraysh, seeing their power and influence threatened, decided to fight back.
And they didn't hold back, did they? I mean, how do you counter the rising tide of a new faith that's gaining converts left and right?
They resorted to a tactic that was both brutal and calculated. A social and economic boycott of Muhammad and his entire clan, the Hashemites.
Okay, so let's unpack this. What did this boycott actually entail? What were the practical implications for the Hashemites?
The Quraysh essentially cut them off from all aspects of Meccan life.
Wow.
No one could trade with them, sell to them, buy from them, or even marry into their families.
Oh.
It was a way to strangle them economically and isolate them socially, hoping to force them to abandon their beliefs or, at the very least, contain their influence.
It's a chilling tactic. It's almost like trying to starve out an idea by cutting off its oxygen supply.
Exactly. Mir describes how the Hashemites were confined to a secluded area of Mecca known as the Sheb of Abu Talib. It was a difficult time marked by hardship and deprivation, but they persevered, relying on their strong bonds and the kindness of sympathetic Meccans who would discreetly bring them supplies.
It's hard to imagine enduring that kind of pressure for years on end. It speaks to the strength of their convictions and the sense of community that had formed around Muhammad.
It does.
But this boycott couldn't have lasted forever, right?
It did drag on for a grueling 2 to 3 years, taking a toll on the Hashemites and undoubtedly hindering the spread of Islam during that time. But it eventually ended. It's fascinating to consider how this experience, this forced isolation and resilience, might have shaped the early Muslim community.
Right. It's like they were forged in the crucible of this boycott, forced to become more self-sufficient and reliant on each other. It probably deepened their faith and solidified their sense of shared identity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it also likely fostered a sense of us versus them, a distinction between the believers and the outside world that would have lasting implications for the development of Islamic identity.
So we've got this backdrop of social and political upheaval, and yet amidst all of this, Muhammad's personal life is also undergoing some significant changes.
It is?
The veil sheds light on his growing harem and the complexities that arose as a result.
Yes, and this is where we get into some interesting territory.
Yeah.
It's important to remember that polygamy was a common practice in 7th century Arabia.
Right.
It was a social norm, not something unique to Muhammad or to Islam.
Right. But even within that context, Muhammad's marriages, particularly during this period, were often driven by specific social and political factors.
They were. For example, several of his marriages were to widows, providing them with security and protection in a society where women were particularly vulnerable.
Okay.
But as his harem grew, It brought new challenges, both logistical and interpersonal.
The veil mentions that he married 2 more women during this period, bringing his total number of wives to 5.
Yes, he married Zainab bint Khuzaimah, known for her generosity and compassion.
Okay.
And Salma, another widow whose husband had died from wounds sustained in battle. These marriages were seen as acts of kindness and a way to care for those in need.
But then there's his marriage to Zainab bint Jahsh, which was considerably more controversial even by the standards of the time.
Absolutely. This marriage caused quite a stir because Zainab was at the time married to Muhammad's adopted son, Zaid.
So walk us through this. How did this even come about?
According to the veil, Muhammad visited Zaid one day and was struck by Zainab's beauty. Zaid, perhaps sensing Muhammad's attraction and wanting to please him, offered to divorce Zainab.
So Muhammad's adopted son offered to divorce his wife so that Muhammad could marry her. That's a pretty bold move.
It certainly highlights the power dynamics at play and the complexities of social customs at the time.
Yeah.
But even Muhammad initially hesitated,
Yeah.
realizing the potential scandal.
Right. I mean, marrying your adopted son's wife is going to raise some eyebrows, even in a society where polygamy is accepted.
It is.
So what happened? Did he ultimately give in to his feelings?
He did, but he justified it through divine revelation.
Oh, wow.
A new verse in the Quran was revealed that essentially nullified the concept of adoptive kinship in Islam, paving the way for Muhammad to marry Zainab without violating any religious laws.
So he basically received a message from God saying it was okay to marry his adopted son's ex-wife. That's a pretty convenient revelation.
It's certainly a moment where personal desires seem to intersect with divine pronouncements in a way that's open to interpretation. Regardless of how one views this incident, it's clear that it was a pivotal moment in the development of Islamic law. It changed the rules regarding adoption and marriage, establishing a clear distinction between blood ties and adoptive relationships.
It's fascinating how a personal event like this could have such a ripple effect on the development of religious doctrine. It also makes you wonder how this whole affair was received by the community at the time.
It definitely caused a stir, but the revelation effectively silenced any dissent. From that point on, Zaid was no longer referred to as Muhammad's son, but by his birth name.
So the revelation provided a theological justification for the marriage and essentially shut down any further debate.
Exactly. And this marriage also coincided with another significant change, the introduction of the veil and other restrictions imposed on Muhammad's wives.
Right. I remember reading about this in the veil. So up until this point, there weren't specific rules about veiling?
Not that we know of. But as Muhammad's harem grew, so did the potential for jealousy gossip and even accusations of impropriety.
Yeah.
Remember, he was a leader, a prophet, and his household was constantly under scrutiny.
It's like the bigger his family became, the more complex the social dynamics and the greater the need for rules and boundaries. It's almost like a microcosm of what was happening in Mecca as a whole, the need to establish a new social order.
That's a great analogy. And the veil suggests that these restrictions were introduced as a way to manage these complexities and protect Muhammad's wives from unwanted attention or rumors.
So what exactly were these restrictions? What did they entail?
The veil was a key element, of course. But there were also rules about speaking to his wives only from behind a curtain and a ban on them ever remarrying even after Muhammad's death. These restrictions set them apart, creating a clear distinction between the prophet's household and the rest of the community.
It's interesting to think about how these rules, initially intended for Muhammad's wives, would eventually extend to all Muslim women, becoming a central tenet of Islamic practice.
It shows how specific social circumstances can influence the development of religious traditions. And it's important to note that around the same time, similar though less strict dress codes were introduced for all believing women, partly in response to harassment they faced from non-believers.
So the veil and other forms of modest dress were in part a response to the social realities of the time, a way to protect women and assert their identity within a hostile environment.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it also reflects how a practice initially adopted by a small group can evolve into a broader social and religious norm.
So we've got social boycotts, dramatic conversions, shifting power dynamics, family drama, and the introduction of the veil, all happening within just a few years. Early Islam was definitely a time of rapid change and evolution, both on a personal and a societal level. It really highlights how these early years were a pressure cooker for the development of Islam. It's like every challenge, every controversy pushed Muhammad and his followers to adapt, innovate, and refine their beliefs and practices.
Yes, and the veil gives us a fascinating glimpse into this process of adaptation. Through a rather personal lens, the dynamics within Muhammad's own household. We've already touched on the complexities of his growing harem.
Right.
But there's another anecdote that really illustrates the challenges of balancing personal life with leadership during this tumultuous period.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this domestic dilemma.
Well, apparently Muhammad had established a system of rotating between his wives' quarters, spending a day and a night with each in turn.
Okay.
A fair system in theory, ensuring that each wife received equal time and attention.
It sounds almost mathematical in its precision. I guess even prophets have to deal with scheduling conflicts.
But in practice, it wasn't quite working out. Some wives felt neglected, others complained, and tensions were rising within the household. Imagine trying to manage the emotional needs of multiple wives, each with her own personality and expectations, while also leading a burgeoning religious movement.
Talk about a high-pressure situation.
Yeah.
So how did Mahomet resolve this delicate domestic issue? Did he call a family meeting? Seek advice from his companions?
He did what he often did in times of uncertainty.
Okay.
He sought divine guidance.
Oh.
And as the story goes, a new revelation conveniently came down directly addressing this very issue.
You're kidding! A revelation about how to manage his wife's schedules? That's incredible.
It's one of those moments where the personal and the divine seem to intersect in a very human way. This revelation essentially freed Mahomet from the rigid rotation system, allowing him to spend more time with whichever wife he chose.
Well, that certainly solved the problem, at least from his perspective. I bet some wives were happier about this new arrangement than others.
Undoubtedly. But beyond the personal implications, this episode reveals something deeper about the evolution of religious authority. It shows how personal needs and social dynamics could influence the interpretation and application of religious principles.
It's a reminder that these historical figures, even prophets, were real people grappling with real-life challenges.
They were.
And their decisions, even those framed as divinely inspired, were often shaped by the very human circumstances they found themselves in.
Absolutely. It's this interplay between the personal, the social, and the divine that makes this period of early Islam so fascinating to study. We see the messy human side of religious development, the compromises, the adaptations, the struggles, and ultimately the triumphs.
And it all comes back to our original question.
Yeah.
How did these early years shape the future of Islam? We've seen how Muhammad, facing intense pressure from all sides, navigated complex social dynamics, political opposition, and even personal dilemmas, all while laying the foundation for a faith that would profoundly change the course of history.
It's remarkable to think that within just a few years, so much happened that would have such a lasting impact. The Abyssinian refugees, the Satanic versus incident, the conversions of Hamza and Omar, the boycott, the evolving family dynamics, the introduction of the veil. Each event, each controversy played a role in shaping the beliefs, practices, and identity of early Muslims.
Exactly. It's a reminder that even the most established religions and social movements have these fascinating, complex origin stories. And by digging deep into these early years, we gain a richer, more nuanced understanding of how Islam evolved from a small band of believers in Mecca to a global faith that continues to shape the world today. So to all our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep into the rich tapestry of history. There's always more to uncover, more to learn, and more to connect with our own lives today.